Welcome all. This is the first Google Hangout with 4 North Carolina related authors and 3 of them young adult novelists. And let's take this time to go ahead and introduce ourselves. Kay, you want to start?
Sure. It's really wonderful to be here. We've had a couple of practice sessions and we're still learning about the technology, and that's been half the challenge and half the fun of the Hangouts, but it's been a lot of fun getting to know the other authors. I'm Kay Goldstein. I am the author of Star Child, which is a book really for all ages, and I live here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Terrific. Lisa?
Okay, I'm Lisa KLINE, and I'm the author of 8 novels for young people. My first novel was Eleanor Hill, and that was a historical fiction, and it won the North Carolina Juvenile Literature Award. And my most recent books were a series called the Sisters in All Seasons series, a series of 5 books about 2 stepsisters who are learning to get to know each other and develop a relationship. And this has been a really fun experience for me, getting to know these other authors. This has been great. So this is exciting.
Terrific, terrific. Rosemary?
My name is Rosemary ZIBART, and I'm writing a series called Far and Away about children who are impacted by World War II. They're middle grade young adults, and also for adults. I probably had as many adults as children reading them. The first book was called True Brit, and it was about an English girl, a very privileged English girl, who travels to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1940 to escape the bombing in London. And it won the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award for Historic Fiction, a Mom's Choice Award, and a Silver Nautilus Award. And then my newest book takes place at the same time period, and it has a child of the same age, 12 years old, but it's a much more poignant story. It's about a German Jewish boy who leaves Hamburg and comes to New York City and creates a new life for himself. So it has been great. It is wonderful to communicate with other writers. It's just a formidable experience, especially writers that I have known for several decades, like Susan and Kay, and I'm getting to know Lisa.
Terrific. I'm Susan Bullington KATZ. I write books, screenplays, plays, and a whole lot of celebrity interviews for television. My book is Conversations with Screenwriters, which is exactly what it says, Conversations with Screenwriters. I was an undergrad creative writing major at UNC, and then went down the road to Duke for playwriting. So I'd love to hear from you all how it is that you got started writing young adult fiction. I know all 3 of you had careers in other things, whether you were writers in different genres before, but you didn't start out as young adult novelists, I don't believe. I know you didn't, Kay.
I know.
So where did you all, how did you all make this transition and end up at this point?
Well, I would call myself an accidental author of young adult fiction. I had written a cookbook, actually sort of a documentary cookbook, quite a few years ago, and have had a career in the food world, in the world of psychotherapy, has been a poet, a blogger, a restaurant critic, and I came across this inspiration one day when I was driving down the road, and about what would happen if I were to write fiction, because it had never occurred to me to do that. And immediately I had this thought, oh, I must write about a star child. I had no idea even what a star child was, and I didn't know why that came to me, but I was so sort of taken with the vision of that and the image of that I went home and wrote essentially the first 2 paragraphs of this book, and then continued to write that intermittently over a long period of time, like over a decade. I didn't know that it would appeal to young adults or middle grade readers until actually I had finished the book and it was in the editing stage. So it actually appeals to many, many different ages, but it is essentially a book about young people who learn to become their authentic selves and how they lose themselves first as star children coming to Earth and learning to be humans, they sort of lose who they are, and then this is about how they discovered to become more authentic again. So it is a coming of age story in some ways, so it was totally accidental that I wrote a young adult book.
Wow. So you had to find out what a star child was along the way, huh?
Yeah, and I'm still learning, I think, about what that was. Oh. And I think the writing fiction is such an amazing experience because it allows you to really take direction from the characters in a way that writing a recipe doesn't allow you to do. Maybe from the ingredients, but certainly not from the characters.
Wow.
I had to write a recipe once, and it was so difficult. I never went back to writing about food again.
Well, I was obsessed with food for so many years that it was just a natural extension of my. It was just a different medium for me. Writing about food or using words was like putting together ingredients. It was just a different pantry of ingredients.
Huh. Rosemary, how did your first young adult book happen?
Well, actually, I think that group of readers, minor early books are kind of 8 to 12-year-olds, and I've always felt like I can remember when I was that age, and I can remember how eager I was to read, how I just always had a book. I was, even when I was sitting in the classroom, I would have the textbook, and then I'd have the library book, hidden from the teacher, and I would be reading constantly. I think that 8 to 12-year-olds has been called unreluctant readers. I mean, they're so eager to learn about the world and to learn about historical times and just to learn, period. And so it seems like I've always been interested in having a sort of big impact, big bang for the buck. I'm kind of a lazy person, so I want to have as much impact with as little effort as I possibly can.
You don't seem lazy to me. You've had a couple of books out there.
Well, I've got a couple of books, and I've got some plays and screenplays and stuff also. But basically, I was interested in the story itself. I mean, I heard about the fact that there were 4 English girls that came to Santa Fe, where I now live, during the war, and I was just gripped again by the image of what that was like. Lisa and I talked at another time about how she saw 2 girls. I think you said they were at the Grand Canyon or somewhere. Somewhere you saw 2 girls.
At a ranch where we went. Yes.
They looked very different, and you wondered what was the story behind them. Well, my idea was, what was it like for an English girl to go from sooty, gray, wet, war-torn London to sunny bohemian Santa Fe, because Santa Fe was very bohemian in those days. And I guess, I put all those things together, and that's how my first book came out.
Oh, interesting. Elisa, I know yours was a different route altogether, wasn't it?
Well, I started out writing for adults, and I wrote and published several short stories for adults. But then my grandmother passed away, and I inherited all of her pictures and letters that she had saved over her whole life, I guess starting in about 1909. And I had never really, she'd been an elderly woman the whole time I knew her. I'd never pictured her as being a young girl. And that just captured my imagination. And I read a lot of these letters, and I sort of started putting together in my head a story of what her young life might have been like. She grew up the daughter of a fisherman and a carpenter on the coast of North Carolina. She wanted to go to high school. She was ambitious, and my mother told me, which something that I had never known as long as I knew my grandmother, that she had been one of the first young women in New Bern, North Carolina to learn to drive a car. And I was fascinated by that, and so I started writing a story about it, and it sort of turned into a novel. And I really wasn't aiming it at a middle grade audience. It was just that the story started when she was 12, and I finished my story when she was 18. So when I sold it, it just ended up selling as a middle grade novel. And then after I sold that, I found that I was able to write in the voice of a tween or a 12 to 14-year-old, that was a natural voice for me. I guess I had an emotional connection. I joke sometimes that I'm emotionally stuck at age 13, and I just, I got stuck there, and that's why I write that way. But I do have vivid memories of what it felt like to be that age, and that's what I have continued to be able to draw upon in writing my other books.
Lisa, I'm sort of laughing about what you said about being emotionally stuck at 13, because I told somebody that I had written a book and it was called Star Child, and they immediately asked if it was autobiographical. And I said, please don't tell anyone. But
that's kind of a compliment.
There's this wonderful theme of all of us becoming so intrigued and fascinated with the character that it sort of, the story wouldn't let us go. And
right.
All three of us had that experience, and then found our own voice within that. And it's quite a journey to write fiction. It's been a joy.
Yeah.
Well, I think my second book that I wrote was called it's called Forced Journey: The Saga of Werner Berlinger. It's now in the third person, but I originally wrote it in the first person, and it's about a boy, a 13-year-old boy, and I felt that was certainly part of me. I was able to express a part of me, a part that was very close to my heart in writing that book. So I do think that when we write these stories, in a sense, they are autobiographical, or at least we're dealing with our stuff. And I wonder how you feel that. Yeah. Definitely.
Every character I've ever written has always had a piece of me, or an emotional piece of me has gone into every character I've ever written, I believe. Yes.
I feel the same way, and I feel that when the story came to me, that it allowed me to look at every little piece of my life, both what presented to me on a daily basis, but also things from the past, and how I could look at those and how I could see them in the story. I recently found a photograph of myself and my grandfather. I was sitting on his lap, and he had a pipe in his mouth, and I was like 18 months old or 2 years old, and I had one of his pipes in my mouth as well. There's a lovely scene in my book where the female star child spends time in the workshop with her grandfather. That came directly from my experience with my grandfather. Yeah. And it was a joy to write that, but it also let me see some things about, somebody would tell me a story, or I would read a quote, or I'd see a piece of a movie, and I'd say, oh, that's what happened to so-and-so. So it opened my eyes to the world in a totally different way.
Wow.
Well, people, I really hate to exclude Susan, because you haven't gotten a chance to pipe in.
Oh, in terms of characters? Absolutely, in terms of characters. I think I was working, when we first had our practice run at this, I was, Santa Monica Rep was getting ready to do one of my plays, See You at Skater's Ballroom, and it's set in the 50s, and somebody asked me, I think it might have been one of y'all, oh no, it couldn't have been one of y'all, you all know that. Somebody asked me, it was a wonderful compliment, did I have to do research for the dialogue? And I did not have to do research for that dialogue, because I was a young girl then, and the main two characters of that play are young girls. And they're 12-year-old girls. And I vividly remember that, just like you were saying, Lisa. I remember that age, and these girls wanted to be on the mouse. They want to be on Mouseketeer. They want to be Mouseketeers more than just about anything. And I pretty vividly remember that. Exactly. They were. The play opens with them fighting about who looks more like a net. Yeah. So, Rosemary, you said something earlier. You were talking about social change with what you write, and I'm curious. Which comes first? The character, the premise, the idea of how does social change fit into what you write?
It's definitely the character. Well, it's definitely the character in the story. I mean, I definitely don't come up with an intellectual concept and think, how can I create a story around this? I would never be capable of doing that, even though in my plays I've written about some fairly complicated philosophical people who you would think, that my plays would be intellectual, but they're not. They're generally romances who just happen to have these intellectuals in them. But definitely the story comes first. But, for example, in True Brit, I felt like it was the story, in a sense it was my story. It was, not that I came from such a privileged background, but I managed to be spoiled even though I wasn't privileged. And in this book, she comes from a very privileged background. She comes to New Mexico, which is still a very poor state. She suddenly realizes that this is how the other half lives. She's never had an inkling, that there are children that grew up without breakfast or without hot water in their houses and stuff like that. And she has to make a decision about, is she going to participate in that, or is she going to remain part of her old world and her old life? And when I speak to kids about it, that's always what I talk about. I talk about the fact that you have these choices in life. Your map gets bigger, and you have these opportunities to step through doors and embrace a bigger world. And do you take that step? Do you move forward and see the rest of the world and do something about it? So that's what I mean by social action. I mean, it wasn't purposeful in a sense, but after I'd written the book, I could see that was a part of it.
That's interesting that perspective comes afterward, right? The kind of things you find out.
I had the opposite experience, because when I first, discovered the Star Child, I thought, well, this would be a great vehicle to talk about meditation, spiritual practice, some things I was interested in. And there were a lot of things that I incorporated early into the book that then went away, because as the characters developed and the story developed, I didn't really have to be so didactic about what it was I was trying to teach, because the characters themselves and the process was actually teaching me something. And even the editing process taught me something about being true to myself, and to stand up for the kinds of things that were in the book that I thought were important, in the language and what happened to the characters, and really consulting them. And so I didn't start out. I started out with one purpose, and then I realized that the real purpose was to really love this process and to experience the full creativity of it. And that created a different book than it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the surprises that happened in addition to that one, Kay, or any of the rest of you? What are some of the surprises that happened to you along the way of writing any one of your books?
Well, Lisa, I'd like to hear what Lisa has to say about that, because you've been writing a bunch of them.
Oh, I don't know. Well, let me think about the surprises thing, and I can talk about that later. But one thing that I wanted to jump on when you were what you were talking about, Kay, is I tend to just write to tell a story, and I just write for the story, and I kind of just let the story unfold, and I find out afterwards a lot of those other things. But I think one of the main things that I read once, a teacher that I had once talked about the fact that the great thing about literature is that it helps you develop empathy for another person who may be unlike you, and that the key source of empathy is the transfer of emotion. And so I really do think that at the heart of when I write is I am trying to find an emotion that my character has. For example, when you mentioned the two girls that I saw in the family, I sort of felt this girl's, I empathized with her emotion when I saw her. She seemed so unhappy, and I started to try to figure out, as writers do, make up a story about this person that I saw sitting at the table next to me and say, why is she unhappy? What could have happened? And I made up a story about it. But the first thing that I felt about that character was emotion, and I wanted to transfer the emotion or capture it and try to express it in the story that I was telling. And I think that is a great thing that literature can do, because someone who's very different from that girl could read it and have more understanding for people who are different than they are. And I learn more empathy in trying to write about characters who are unlike me as well. So it's a wonderful thing about literature, I think. So that had nothing to do with surprises. Sorry about that.
That's totally all right. I know.
It's worrisome to me that our children are reading less and are watching video games or playing video games more, because I just don't think that the emotional content is as great. And I do think that that's so key to what we strive to do as writers, in the sense that we're really striving for young people to embrace, to become bigger human beings by embracing other cultures and embracing other ways of looking at things and embracing even other just dilemmas, Lisa, like the dilemma of a mixed family. Both understanding where you're coming from with your own, validating the feelings that you might have, because there might be children out there that would read that book and it would validate their experiences. Or my book about Werner Berlinger, which is really a book about immigration. I mean, it's about the hardship of leaving a culture and leaving a language and leaving a family and having to struggle to create everything new. So any child who's been through that experience can have their feelings validated, and then other children who haven't had that experience can have some understanding of it. And I really do worry that our society is emphasizing less children reading fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
I can understand that. Rosemary, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. When we first, Lisa, you were talking about the unreluctant middle grade reader. And at the same time, I wonder too, though, about the state of publishing, because it's a precarious time for the publishing industry, and who knows what's happening with it tomorrow. So, and we've watched bookstores close one by one, sadly, sadly, sadly. So I'm wondering what it is that makes you all want to write books at this juncture. And I'm wondering if that has any bearing, too, on young readers. And maybe there are those readers out there who are still looking toward books to find good stories.
I'd like to start with just saying that I like to write because it just brings me so much joy. I love the process. I love to immerse myself in the words that do capture, as Lisa was saying, that captures the emotional content, the understanding of something that I see and sense and feel, and to be able to put that into words that please me on the paper is something that is just a great gift to be able to do. And I don't feel like I have enough time to do it sometimes. It's almost a luxury to immerse myself in a story. And I'm wanting to do it again. I don't know what the story's going to be, and I just have to make the time to sit and see what it's going to be. But that's why I want to do it. And I also know that the people who have read my book, it's had some impact. And it has an impact sometimes at a level that's very subliminal, both for the adults and for the kids. And it's very gratifying to hear from someone that they've read your story and that it has touched them in some way. That's what else can you do in life except touch other people? So that's why I do it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was the biggest surprise for me, is that there were people out there that loved my books, because you work really hard on this, and then you turn it over, and And I know with plays too. I mean, you have no idea really how people are going to react, and not everybody is going to love it. But when people do love it, it's almost more shocking than when they don't love it, you know, because it's like, well, gosh, did I really do what I set out to do? I mean, that's the most amazing feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is. I wanted to be a writer even when I was in second grade. I wrote these little stories, and I think they're still in the closet at my parents' house on that wide-lined paper we used to have, and I illustrated them. And so I started trying to write at a very young age, and it's always been something that I wanted to do. If it hadn't worked out, I don't know what I would have done, because the other jobs I've had in my life, I've been absolutely terrible at all of them. I was a waitress in Chapel Hill when I was in graduate school, and people would be waving their hands going, "Waitress, waitress!" I was standing in the waitress station trying to think up what was going to happen in my story, and I was completely zoned out. So I was, you know, I'm glad that I was somehow able to work hard enough at writing, and as I continue to try to get a little bit better, work hard enough so it worked out, because I don't know what else I would have done. So anyway,
you know, it's interesting because I started out writing like you did as a child. I would write poetry books, and I would put them together, and I had some thought that I would be a journalist. And somewhere along the line, probably in college, I got very sort of turned off to the writing process, probably because I, you know, didn't know how to deal with some pretty major criticism of the way I wrote. So I just stopped writing for about 15 or 20 years. It took me that long to sort of do a lot of other things and to have other mediums that I use for my creativity. I feel I am an artist of some sort, and I've used everything I've learned since then and put that into my writing now. But it took me a while to get my voice back, and I think that does happen to a lot of people. They don't have the confidence in their writing, and I can see where I can trace through my life how the writing was important to me, but it wasn't really a public thing until much, much later. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to spend the time and to bring myself back into the world of writing.
Yeah.
Well, your writing really is exquisite, Kay. I mean, your use of metaphor and just your use of language itself is really, really impressive. I think that was the most impressive part of your book for me, was just the beauty of the language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I had never written like that in that voice before, so that was another learning for me. I can, you know, I have various other voices, you know, for writing recipes or writing blogs or being a little bit of a smartass sometimes, but that was a different, that came from out of someplace else. That was very touched me in a very different way, and I loved being able to be in that world.
How much do you think being a North Carolinian or having North Carolina connections has affected you in your work? Anybody?
Lisa, you've been a long.
Well, for me, I guess when I set my stories, I usually set them in North Carolina because that's the place that I know best. The series that I just finished, I wrote. The first one took place at a ranch in the western part of the state. I wrote one that took place on the Outer Banks, and I wrote one that took place near Emerald Isle, and one of them here at Lake Norman. So just different places that I've loved in the state. I find myself writing about it over and over again because it is my home, and it's the place I know best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not from North Carolina. I'm from Tennessee, but I think that coming from the South, first of all, they talk again and again about the storytelling tradition, but there's no question to me that you do feel it. I mean, people do tell stories to one another in the way, and just their language, and the fact that I was exposed to so many different kinds of people speaking, black people and white people and rich people and poor people, and to me, I could never have, and I worked as a journalist for 20 years at least, and that was the great experience of that. And Susan, you probably have the same feeling about it. Is that you got to hear all these different voices. And I always loved being able to try to convey in the writing the people's voices. Even if I changed the words a little bit, I tried to convey their voices and what they were trying to say. And that was always so interesting to me, that everybody has such a unique way of.
I felt that I grew up partially in North Carolina and partially in Buffalo, New York. I'm from North Carolina. But I feel like one of the things, because of that, having lived in two very, very different cultures, that I found a great, I was always looking for what people had in common, because there were the different voices, there were the different foods, there were the different customs. But there was always something that I was always looking to see how they were like other people. What was the essential part of them that was like me or like others, and to find some common ground. So I think that having lived in North Carolina several times and also in the North, the geography and the different cultures did have some influence in how I look at the world. I also felt that in writing Star Child, that the geography of Martha's Vineyard, which is really what inspired that story, it's totally embedded. It's like the paper that the book is written on, and it's because it's a place that I love, and that it's a very magical place, and I think the book is very magical as a result, because it's got that backdrop. I even did a blog one time where I went through to all these so many of my favorite places and said, look, this is where Tara did this, and this is where Marius did this, because those pieces of landscape were really embedded in the story. And it was unconscious. It was really unconscious.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I grew up in from age 6 until 17 in the Northeast, but my parents were from South Carolina. And so every summer we'd load up the car and head down to my grandparents in South Carolina. And I feel really fortunate about that, because story was so important to them. And my favorite times were those summertime afternoons after the middle of the day dinner was all done and everything. And I was real young, and my mom and my grandmother would sit out on the front porch and rock and tell stories, and they'd tell stories all afternoon. And I just love that. And story, I just grew up thinking that that's how it was. That story was really important to everybody. But fortunately, it was important in our family, and I love that. So, Rosemary, when you're talking about being a journalist, I think being a journalist is the coolest career of all, because I get to finagle my way into other people's lives all the time. And I just love it. I hear their stories. I'm still hearing stories. It's great.
Well, it was
really
a big deal for me to switch from being a journalist, which I'd done for quite a while, to working on my own stuff. But it was definitely, and I still do a little bit of journalism. I'm in charge of a website, and I do videos for that and video editing for that. So I do a little bit of journalism, but I'm much more comfortable imagining my own characters. It's just something about it. I love to live in that. I mean, even though I often write about historical figures, so I'm writing about real characters, and I pull on their real dialogue or their real writings or whatever. But still, there's something about being able to live in a world of your own creation, which I really totally enjoy. Mm-hmm. And also just to be able to invest it with so much heart means a lot to me. I did an interview with the novelist Tony Hillerman once, and he told me this story, which I really revere. He had been the managing editor at the New Mexican. Do you know who Tony Hillerman is? He wrote a lot of mysteries that take place on the Navajo reservation. And Joe Leaphorn was his detective. Anyway, he was the managing editor at the New Mexican, And then he got called to the penitentiary by somebody on death row, and the person wanted to tell his life story because so that his mother would hear it, his mother who had deserted him when he was 14 years old. And Hillerman didn't believe that he could convey that in an article, so he went back to graduate school to learn creative writing.
Oh, that's
a great story.
That's an amazing story.
It is.
It's all about the human heart. But I envy you, Susan, for being able to talk to some of those really brilliant thinkers and really brilliant writers and to glean all of their truths and all of their aspirations.
It's truly a joy. It's a joy to do that. But since I walk both sides of this, and you know, going back to school in playwriting, I had to learn to tell my own story. After years of having reported on other stories. So I do both, and I know what you're talking about. I really do. I wonder if there are questions. I don't know how to see about questions from people. While I'm waiting to find out about that, let me ask you this. I want to know about, do you all hear from readers? Do you hear comments, questions, fan mail? What kinds of things do you hear from some of your readers, or when you give readings, what kinds of things do you hear from your readers?
Blank.
When I make school presentations, a lot of the students often ask me if my characters are based on real people, and when I tell the story about seeing the girls sitting at the table next to me and making up a story, they want to know if I ever told that girl that I had written about her, or they really want to know what the real source of my characters is. That's a kind of a recurring question that I get. And another question I get is where do your ideas come from? That's another thing. And some I do get feedback that kids have read my books more than once, which is really makes me feel so wonderful. One young lady has read my series 5 times, and I'm so touched by that. I'm just really touched by that. So.
Yeah.
You know, to get to read a book and have someone read your series 5 times is really, it's a wonderful, it must feel really great.
I know, it really made me feel good.
I heard about a girl who read my book 4 times, but that was just one book, so it's not like reading a series 5 times. It's really pretty awesome. Yeah. But last time I was at a book signing, and sometimes it's so discouraging at book signings. I mean, you may have 15 or 17 or even more than that, but in general, it's a challenge to do it. But last time I went, I saw this little old Hispanic lady, and I asked her, I said, what are you, I asked her, how did you come? Did you see the ad in the newspaper? And she said she had, and she said, I said, well, she said, that book was so adorable. She had it in a plastic bag for me to sign. And all it takes is one person who tells you that. You can go on for another year or 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, every now and then I get an email or, somebody has read it, they've had the book and then they just sit down and read it in one sitting and they tell me, how they feel about it. And it's so gratifying. I love having interactions with people who've actually read the book. Lots of times when you do a book talk or a book signing, the people who are there haven't read it. That's been my experience. And so you're really telling them a lot about the process, but they haven't really read the book. So I have done some book clubs, and that's been fabulous because you sit around somebody's living room and you drink a little coffee or a glass of wine or something, and you actually interact with people who've read the book, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, Susan,
obviously not middle grade kids drinking wine, but
So, Susan, I wanted to ask you, so you're going back and forth from fiction to nonfiction. You don't have any problem. You're equally happy with both of them?
Yeah, I am. I am. I actually didn't know that would happen. Well, I say I didn't start out to do what I do, but that's not true. Because if you look at I was on the staff of my high school weekly. I was an editor for my high school weekly and doing features and interviewing people. And so, and then even when we were at Carolina, I was doing some of that as well. And so this is just what I do with television is just a natural extension of all that. But I really always thought it was in the service of paying the rent while I was writing other things. The truth is now is just mic me up and sit me down, and I'm very much at home. I really thoroughly enjoy that. I did some interviews on Saturday, and I just really, really, really enjoy it. I did some interviews for the new movie Inside Llewyn Davis.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. I've been hearing some amazing things about that movie.
I thought it was just terrific.
Where can we see you on television? Where can we see your interviews on TV?
Showtime. On Showtime.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Those were done for Showtime, and they're going to be airing the movie as well as the concert from that movie. And but
when you do that, are you working for Showtime or are you working for the movie?
I work for Showtime.
You work for Showtime, right?
For Showtime, right?
Nice.
Right. Yeah, it's been great.
And you're a published poet as well.
Right, right. That was my first book was a book of poems.
So you have a total range of mediums here for writing. So it's not everybody can do that.
Don't you think, though, Kate, as a poet yourself, don't you think that poetry gives you a really nice kind of field from which to operate?
Well, it does for me because it really requires, for the kind of poetry I write, it's like you really have to say in as few words as possible to capture the essence of something that you experience, and that's a discipline that it is helpful in any kind of writing, I think.
I was thinking too that poetry, I was a poetry undergrad, and poetry taught me to listen, to listen to other people, but also to listen for those voices like the one that told you to write about Star Child.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do think that for me, and I think it's very evident for me in Star Child, that there was a rhythm of the way the sentences went together, and that when the editing process occurred, I really felt like I needed to pay very close attention that if I changed something in a paragraph or a sentence or moved it, that I didn't want to lose that rhythm within the paragraph or within the sentence, and that became very important to me. And I think I learned that from writing poetry.
Terrific. I just got a question, and it flew across my screen and then disappeared.
Oh, I see it. I've got it here. Do you know?
Do you have it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have it. What does it say?
And maybe this is a good wrap-up question, actually. What piece of advice would you give to aspiring writers today?
Oh, terrific. Go to it, guys.
Thank you.
Well, I always tell people, aspiring writers, that they need to be true to their own voice. That's really important, to believe that they have something unique to say, and at the same time they need to be open to feedback, because you do need to grow, you do need to listen to what other people have to say about your writing. But you sort of have to balance the two. You have to kind of sift through what you hear, and if you hear the same thing 2 or 3 times, start to pay attention to it. But at the same time, hold fast to what's important to you and why you're writing.
That's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
I guess advice that I've given students in the past is to practice. I think so often people think of music as being something you must practice and sports as being something you must practice, but they don't often think of writing in that same category, that practicing writing for a couple of hours every day is a wonderful habit to get into, and it really, I think it helps you as you practice. You can try to improve your writing in the same way that you'd improve a sport or a musical instrument.
You know, what you both said, I would totally agree with. I would add that I think that when you sit down to write, that you should be totally open to the flow of what comes to you. That you shouldn't try to edit it or try to say, okay, well, this has to go there and I can't write that now. And you should just write. Write. When I tell people, if you want to be a writer, the way you do that is that you write. So you sit down and you just do it. And don't worry about editing. Don't worry about whether it's grammatically correct. Don't worry about any of those things. You can always find people to help you with those. But what's really important is trying to get that true voice out. And the way you do that is just make some space and just trust yourself to just go with it. And you'll be amazed at the stuff you'll write. You'll come up and, 30 minutes or an hour later, you look and say, oh my gosh, did I write that? That's a really wonderful experience.
It really is. It really is. Along those same lines, my advice is very similar. The write, and persevere. Persevere. Because that has made all the difference for so many people, and I've watched it in my students as well. The ones who succeed have been the ones who persevere, who simply persevere. It seems simple, but it's persevere.
Michael Chabon said that for success, you had three. There were three ingredients to success, and you only had control over one of them, and they were talent, luck, and perseverance.
Right.
That's great. I love that. That's a great way to wrap it up, don't you think?
Right. And I think, and it goes back to the story for me. I worked on this one little story for 15 years, and I got turned down by, I lost count of how many publishers didn't want to publish this book. And the same thing with my first book. Lots of people didn't want to, and I saved all my rejection letters on the first book just so that I could understand that not everybody had the same perspective about my book, or what they liked or they didn't like. So you have to just, you do have to persevere. You just have to believe in yourself. And if you don't fully believe in yourself, find some people around you who can help support you and give you some good feedback and help you along. Because your voice,
well, I enjoy that the group stays together and continues to talk to one another, because it's been a really great experience.
Right.
It really has. Thank you all for inviting me to join you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, and I hope we do get to do it again, and maybe we'll expand our group.
This is terrific, guys. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you, and thank you to our listeners.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.